Call the member for Bowman.
Well, Deputy Speaker, what a spray. I mean, we've just managed to attack foreign interests, corporate greed, free trade agreements, all in the one brushstroke, all over this single case of contaminated berries. And coming from a place like Capricornia, you'd know just how important it is to be promoting both the consumption and the growing of local products, but this is not quite so simple. I mean, this is about a platform that is ultimately about promoting trade and cooperation between nations, about growing trade as being a benefit for all nations, but also understanding you've got to be able to have a certain level of surveillance for safety. And so listening very carefully and picking through the rhetoric, I did pick up some suggestions from the opposition speaker was test more foods, more often, more audits, and where possible use some new technology. Well, you know, you really have to ask a group like FSANZ and agriculture exactly what's going to be productive and effective. I mean, it's okay to say only 5% of consignments are tested. That's not 5% of all packets of frozen berries, don't forget. It's very, very hard to test an entire chunk of frozen berries and be able to say that there's no hepatitis A anywhere in that chunk of frozen berries. There's probably a couple of contaminated droplets in there with no guarantee you'll find it. No, most of this testing is on residue products, which can be seen through an entire consignment. It's far more uncertain to try and find hepatitis A. So before we mislead anyone, there's no more cases of hepatitis A so far this year than any other year. We're not facing a tsunami of nasty hepatitis A spirited in here by some foreign country that needs to be pushed back. We need to have a little bit more of an understanding of where risks are and respond accordingly. So before we impugn FSANZ, who simply work out what those appropriate recommendations are, and before we drag in staff changes to FSANZ as being the cause of the Hep A disaster, which of course it isn't, and I see the opposition speaker now waving her hands from side to side saying that she wasn't suggesting that, let's remember that they simply make the expert guidelines upon which agriculture and others carry out the test. So it's not just FSANZ that should be picked on here. And if you talk to FSANZ, they'll say to you, well, in these areas we don't see the staffing changes as in any way affecting the ability to make our recommendations. Recommendations are taken ultimately by agriculture who carry them out. Now, there is, of course, the bigger picture that's very popular, and that's talking about better country of origin labelling, more information for customers. And I'm sure on that point we can start to agree because it's less of a hysterical reaction to what happened over the last month. Noting also that the one single case here in the ACT is a good friend of ours, Mr Callum Dennis, who actually works in this building, and we wish him well in his recovery from what is potentially putatively related to the berry incident. So it's very, very close to home for many of us that work in this building. But I think it's just important not to get carried away in this immediate reaction to blame other countries, the poor quality of their imports, because ultimately we are tied both through very, very productive and successful free trade agreements that give both countries in this bilateral arrangement a lot of advantages. But we've also got the WTO obligations, which say that just for no other purpose than nationalism should we ever be running interference on a foreign product simply because it's from overseas. So let's understand that instead of just reacting and saying, start testing every packet of berries, and there was a real hint of that in what the opposition speaker was saying, we need to also realise that if standards do fall and there's a genuine health risk, there's every opportunity under current law to prosecute that particular issue. If health standards are at risk, you can take action, and this is a perfect example of where that can occur. When it comes to where our food comes from, there is some level of agreement. I just think it's utterly inadequate that you can just say the word imported and that customers don't deserve to know where from. And I sense that will be an area of progress. And over the previous 1 or 2 year period, the rolling average of how much foreign content appears in a mixed food should be the subject of labelling on a packet. If you've got room on the packet to say imported, Deputy Speaker, you've got room on there to list the largest 3 providers of that imported component of your product, whether it's above or below 50%. There's general agreement that just flipping imported and local once it tips over 50% is also inadequate. But I just leave this debate today by saying that ultimately, you know, giving people 20/20 vision, incredible foresight and a PhD in food science is never going to lead every Australian to read packages and labels. And we keep squeezing these food manufacturers for the entire Wikipedia to be printed on the back and sometimes the front of products. Look, in the end, I think Australians want to know in every area, given that only 15% of what's on the shelves of supermarkets comes from Australia, they want to know right at the margins what are the products that are having greater propensity to use some Australian products where there's a choice to do so. And in the end, perhaps we need something even simpler, which is to identify in categories where there is an Australian component those companies using the most Australian product in their class. That will be a very productive and fertile area, and one which I'm sure both sides can agree.